I'm Nader.
And I'm Julie. We're the co-presidents of the UALC. This is the official UALC podcast where we talk about law school, the LSAT, and legal field.
Episodes go up every second Wednesday featuring law students, lawyers, professors, and so on. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for returning to another episode of the UALC podcast. Today's guest is Jessica Eisen. She is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Law here at the U of A. So why don't we kick off this episode with you just telling us a little bit about yourself, your journey leading up to law school, why you chose to pursue a career in law, and then your decision to pursue further education following the completion of your JD.
Okay, great. Oh, that's a lot of questions in one. I teach in the areas of constitutional law, feminist legal theory, comparative constitutional law. I also teach a foundations to law course that all first-year students have to take in their first 2 weeks of law school to sort of get everybody having a common start to their law school experience, create some common foundations for everyone entering the class. Your question was how I got into the legal profession or how I got into academia?
Yeah, just kind of your journey leading up to law school and why you chose to pursue a career in law specifically.
Sure, certainly. So as an undergraduate, I was always very politically engaged. I was involved in a lot of student advocacy on a number of different topics. And coming out of undergraduate, was really eager to start doing something that I felt like was going to be making a difference. So my first career coming out of undergraduate was to work as a community organizer. And I worked for a bunch of different community organizing groups, particularly on environmental and environmental justice issues. And I found pretty quickly that the kinds of skills and strengths that are important for that kind of work didn't cover off everything that I wanted out of my career. So it's necessary in a social justice organization for people who are doing the sort of organizing work to receive messaging points and push them out. But I found as I was doing the work, feeling sort of increasingly interested in what went into developing those messages and choosing the campaigns. And I just felt as an organizer that I wasn't engaging with the issues of interest to me in the way that I wanted to be. So law school seemed like a really natural choice, a place where I assumed I would encounter people who were really interested in trying to define justice projects and, think for themselves and in a forum that encourages debate about what is good and just and what the law should pursue. So I took the LSAT and the rest was history. I went to law school after about a year and a half working as an organizer.
And then, how did you make the decision to ultimately go back to school after completing your JD? Because, of course, undergrad JD, it's quite a number of years. So what kind of kept you going in academia?
Yeah, so I think I pretty soon knew that academic research is where I wanted to wind up if I could make it happen. And I was very fortunate to have mentors that were encouraging of me on this. And for me, it was less a question of whether to go back and try to pursue academia as to when. Because I was really persuaded that it was important for me and the kind of legal research I wanted to do to spend some time actually practicing law before going into academia. So I set myself a sort of time limit. I wanted to spend 5 years in legal practice before returning to academia. I think I made it 3 before I felt that it was time. Life was short. I wanted to be doing work that was a little different than I was doing in legal practice. So I had done a couple years of work for the government and about a year in private practice. And what really motivated me to go back is that I had gotten this really wonderful job in private practice, doing, working for someone who was, a really prominent person in my chosen field, at a very respected law firm, doing, work that was of interest to me on claimant side discrimination suits. And even in that setting, I felt like I wasn't quite in the right place. So I thought, if I'm going to fall in love with legal practice, it would have been in this job. And when that's not how I felt about it, I knew that it was time for me to start kind of moving towards seeing if I could make a go of it in academia.
So, you said your interest was in academia and it was a matter of when. Did you expect yourself to become a professor and go down that route, or was there something else you had in mind in that academia field?
So never expect, only hope. I didn't, being a legal academic is really, it's not everybody that wants to do it gets to do it. There's just too few spots, and too many talented people trying to enter into that space. So I always knew that there was a chance that I would wind up doing policy work or something else that was, a way to make use of my degree, but the idea that I would have wound up with a teaching job at a research university, that's just, I'm just fortunate it turned out that way. I certainly didn't feel that I had any guarantee. And I often tell this to people who are considering pursuing academia, that there are a lot of stages to get there, right? Especially in legal academia, you do your law degree, and then you do a master's of laws and a doctorate of laws. And I always say, only take that next step if you're not going to feel regret about it, if you don't get, a professorship at the end of the line. If you're still going to be glad you did it, if it leads somewhere else, then it's a good idea to pursue it. But I think, as I said, it's just a competitive and unpredictable field. So I think it's the kind of thing that you have to pursue with a sense that you need a plan B in mind.
Yeah, it's of course extremely competitive, and we hear it from everyone: statistics, GPAs, LSATs, all that. Do you have any pieces of advice that you would like to share for undergraduate students looking to pursue a career in law? Are there any essential qualities that they should develop to help prepare them for law school and the legal system, in your opinion?
Uh, so that's a great question. So I think there's a couple pieces there. So I sense that part of your question is about kind of getting into law school in the first place, but maybe part of it is about how to manage once you're there. And I think for both getting into law school and deciding what to do when you're there, I think it's really important to remember that the legal profession has certain pressures and structures in it that are going to, for many students, make them feel like there's a certain way that they need to be in order to be successful as a lawyer, or in order to get into law school. But I think the people who, come out strongest from the experience are those who find a way to sort of marry their own hopes and expectations for their own self and their own lives with the expectations of law school and the legal profession. So I think, my one piece of advice is, yes, be savvy, think about what next steps are going to help you get where you need to go, but don't lose yourself. Whatever it is that makes you special is still special, even if you feel like it doesn't show up in your loss and your LSAT number. So try to maintain some balance between a sort of appropriate focus on the things that are going to help you get where you need to go. It's the real world. I'm not going to tell you, throw out your LSAT prep books, because the reality is that your chances of getting to where you want to go are enhanced by, applying yourself to certain tasks that are likely to help you get good grades or a good LSAT score. But the real trick is trying to find ways to sort of make the decision about how much of yourself you actually want to give over to conforming to those expectations, and how much you need to hold on to what's motivating you as a person.
In your 3 years practicing, as you mentioned, what would like a typical day in your life as that lawyer, at first in government, I believe you mentioned, and then in the private practice, how did that look like? And then now, as your career shifts, how does your role as a lawyer change throughout that?
So the roles that I took on in legal practice were really quite different, one from the next. So when I was an articling student, I did my articles at the Constitutional Law Branch of the Ministry of the Attorney General for Ontario. So that work was almost entirely appellate advocacy, which means we were reading, you know, materials from trials that had already happened. And most of what we were doing was focusing on making really precise legal arguments. So it was a lot of time working with cases, trying on different kinds of arguments, that sort of thing. And then in my subsequent work, I was doing a lot more what we might think of as sort of trial level litigation. So, which ends up being a lot more driven by sort of factual disputes about what happened between the parties. With, yes, of course, the law is structuring the inquiry in the background, but it's sort of less of a focus on legal research than you see if you're doing appellate work. So in those later roles, working in civil litigation, working as a prosecutor for the Ministry of Labor, which I did briefly, the job was more about sort of coming to understand in real detail what happened in a particular case, what was the relevant legal framework, and how are you going to build the best strategy and make the best sort of presentation before an adjudicator or in a motion or in a arbitration to sort of press your client's interest or the public interest in the case of a prosecution job. Yeah, I think, and then the shift to legal academic work, I mean, it is a very different kind of work. So my focus is less on trying to understand and piece together how to move forward the interests of a prosecution service or my particular client, and instead pursuing different, I guess, more diffuse kinds of goods. So building classes that are going to help my students grow into the legal professionals that they want to be. So, pulling together course materials, designing lectures, designing exercises and exams that are going to help my students to develop some of those important skills, pursuing my own research questions, which is a lot of reading, a lot of writing, a lot of going to conferences to talk to other people who are interested in similar questions to myself, and service to the university and the law school. So being involved with faculty hiring or curriculum decisions, to try to sort of steer the institution in a direction that is going to best support the teaching and research that happens in our faculty.
Definitely sounds like a lot of work, and I'm sure it's very rewarding in its own respect. Whether you go into be a practicing attorney or whether you go into academia, I'm sure each field has its benefits. So how have you managed to maintain a work-life balance throughout your career? And do you have any suggestions perhaps to avoiding burnout and being able to maintain that work-life balance in such a rigorous profession?
I mean, no, I don't. I don't know that I have figured it out yet. I have a 2-year-old. So part of the way that I maintain work-life balance is that there is often a 2-year-old demanding my time. And so it's not really an option to kind of put aside my personal life or ignore it because she's right there asking me for for attention that I want to give her. So it's a particular circumstance, having young kids or other people where you're in a sort of care relationship that kind of forces you to find the balance. But I think there's no question about it that everybody has to make decisions about where and how they're going to spend their time. And to the extent that I have any advice on it, it's to try to be mindful about when you are making choices. I think it can often feel to people at all stages of their career that they don't have choices, that for example, preparing for the LSAT just takes up so much time that you can't possibly, attend your friend's birthday dinner or, whatever other, competing commitments might be happening in your life. And my advice is not to choose one or the other, but to just be aware of when you are choosing. And to try to be sort of structured and systematic about it, which is something that's not possible to do every day, but it is possible once in a while to try to step back, look at the choices you're making and thinking, am I actually building the life that I want to have? Am I taking time for the things that matter to me? Am I making some sort of short-term sacrifice on one front or the other? And if so, when do I stop making that sacrifice and start shifting things another way? So there's no magic solution except to just be aware when you're making decisions and choices, and be mindful about them in light of your own priorities.
Yeah, work-life balance is a funny one when we bring it up with anyone in the legal profession because they all kind of say it does not exist or it's very difficult to manage, like a lot of times if you're passionate about your work, you feel like it is your life. And a part of our club school is to help those students who are kind of on the fence about law because I know a lot of people understand how much work it is and how rewarding it can be, although very difficult. You've been working at the U of A since around 2018, and you mentioned you both teach kind of 1L introduction courses as well as 2L and 3L. Have you noticed any trends kind of in the students that you are teaching that you think, oh, this person is really fit for this career? Like they definitely, are committed to it, or have you had any discussions with students about maybe what really drew them into the career? And, something that I think our listeners could kind of, who are on the fence, see like, oh yeah, this is for me, or I can see my position in this field.
So there is such a diversity of students who find their footing in law school one way or another, but there are also, I wouldn't see my role here as being to persuade everybody that they should go to law school. I mean, it is a particular kind of path and there's opportunity costs associated with it. So I think if there are people who are thinking carefully about whether a career in law or pursuing legal studies is right for them, what I would say is, yeah, keep thinking about it. It's not an obvious choice. It's not the best choice for everybody. And there's so many different paths that you can take. So I mean, yes, I've seen students who've thrived in law school, but I can't say there's a common trait among them. I mean, I suppose you have to work hard. I haven't seen people succeed without working hard, but that can look so different for different people. So there's not even one model of what working hard looks like. So I think for students who are unsure about it, I think often one of the hardest things, but most important, is to try to put yourself in proximity to legal professionals and see if their lives look appealing to you. If you see anybody who's on a path that looks like it's interesting to you, then that's maybe a sign that you are sort of pointing in the right direction. But that's really hard advice because people don't all have the same access to people who are working in legal professions. So saying, spend time around lawyers is easy for some people whose, uncle is a lawyer, but for other students who might not know anyone working in law at all, it might actually be quite a bit more work and more burdensome to seek out people who are working in law and who maybe have some kinds of similar priorities or experiences to themselves. So to the extent that you're able to be around lawyers and people who are pursuing legal profession, try to find those moments and see if you feel that connection and reflection. But the profession only grows and changes when people look at the legal profession and maybe don't see the kind of lawyer that they want to be and go ahead with it anyways. And that can be one of the hardest kinds of journeys for a law student to take. But I wouldn't want to minimize the burdens associated with trying to kind of forge your own path and vision for your future that is different from what you see from other lawyers. But it's a huge service to the profession when people, in my view, it's a huge service to the profession when people find ways to sort of expand the boundaries of what you can do as a lawyer and a legal professional, the different ways you can be in community and society, and the different kinds of objectives and that you might pursue, or the balance you might strike in your own life. So all this is to say, there's no one formula, really. I think it's prudent to think about it and to really consider, what would you do instead if you weren't a lawyer, and, feel ready to lose out on the opportunities to pursue whatever is in that other path. But at the same time, there's nothing that anyone can tell you in advance about what it's going to be like. Partly because it's just it's a really hard experience to explain. I remember as a 1L thinking, if I could have gone back in time by 1 year and tell myself what this is going to be like, I don't even know what I would say. I don't even know. And that was just me thinking about going back in time by 1 year. So obviously, when we're dealing with sort of the advice of people who may have very different contexts and life experience, the gap can grow even wider about how much it's possible for somebody else to tell you what law school is like. There's no magic formula other than hard work. And, that is just one small piece of the puzzle. And it's really hard to get a sense in advance of whether you're going to find your stride and what that's going to look like. So sorry to be so mysterious about it, but I think my main thought is just that it's wise to be mindful. And if you're on the fence because you're not sure, you're probably thinking about it in the right way.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some really great advice there. And as you mentioned, it's challenging to be able to surround yourself with people like lawyers or those in the legal profession who are very experienced. And then even when you do, ultimately you kind of get a very lawyerly answer where it depends. It just really depends on your
That's the answer I just gave.
And of course, yeah. But I would say we get this question all the time. What is the best way for someone, especially an undergrad, to reach out and network with lawyers or be able to have those experiences where they can, although not completely decide whether law is for them or what area of law they're going into, maybe be able to make a better informed decision about whether they could possibly see themselves doing this as a career?
Well, this podcast seems like a great resource for people who are trying to get that kind of exposure. I would say if you live, this is mostly University of Alberta students, I take it, listening to this podcast, which means you live in a city and are in a university that has a law faculty. So pay attention to what events are going on there. If there's something happening that seems like it's in an area of interest that would overlap with your own, go take it in, have a listen. You'll not just hear kind of from the person who's there presenting, but you'll also get a sense of the questions in the room and the vibe of the people who are being drawn to the same questions as you, but in a legal setting. So I would say try to find, excuses to hang around the law faculty or public lectures that are hosted at the law faculty, or I know our Center for Constitutional Studies sometimes has a downtown charter series where they do presentations that are designed for non-academic audience about legal issues. And I imagine that someone other than me would be well equipped to point out what resources there are online in terms of, blogs following legal academics or lawyers on Twitter. There's now, I think, a lot of ways that this world is maybe more accessible to people than it used to be. So I think all of those are probably pathways to, get around lawyers in their own spaces and hear how they're thinking and reacting to problems.
Yeah, so just to move on from that specific question, are there any incorrect assumptions that individuals tend to make about law school that you wish you could correct them on, both about maybe not just law school, but the legal field in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think my answer is maybe less in the realm of correct, incorrect, and more in the realm of values. But I think a lot of people think that the legal profession and being a law student is very competitive and cutthroat. But I think it's not incorrect, because when enough people in that setting view the world that way, that does define aspects of the space. But I suppose what I would say is that that's not the only way to be successful as a lawyer or as a law student. And I see increasingly, students really understanding that there is a relational component to it, that building strong relationships with your colleagues as peers, supporting each other through the challenges of making it through law school, but also the legal profession beyond that. So I would say, if you're thinking that you're going to go to law school with the aim of, trying to outrun everybody, I don't want to say you're thinking about it the wrong way, but you're not thinking about it the only possible way. And that there are people who go in thinking, I am going to be a person of integrity, who I feel proud to be. And I'm going to do that by building relationships in a community of people who see the role of the profession in the same way, that you can have a really beautiful and successful career in law with that attitude as well.
Yeah, so I guess with that in mind, to expand on perhaps some of those points a little more, how has a law degree and your subsequent experience in the legal profession and through academia, how have those experiences changed your perspective on the world?
It's hard to answer that because I don't know what the other version of me would have done. How would I be a different person if I hadn't gone to law school? I mean, I guess it depends what other path I could have taken, right? Like, it's not law or nothing, it's law or something else. And I'm not sure what that would have been. So there's a way in which that's a hard question to answer, but I will still try not to just wiggle out of it. I will say that law school has sort of encouraged and supported me in developing a mode of thinking that is maybe a bit more precise, more interested in kind of categorizing and organizing intuitions to try to make sense of them, and to think about persuasion as a sort of important separate step, aside from sort of initial questions of right and wrong that lawyers also have to contend with. So I don't know. I I'd hesitate to say what else, because it's just impossible to know what to attribute to my experience with the law and what to attribute to just, who I am, and what would have been different if I'd taken another path. It's hard to say.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard one to answer, so we totally get it. We're coming to an end. And one question we always like to ask is, what would be your biggest suggestion or kind of take-home message for anyone who's listening and hoping to pursue a career in law?
Yeah, I guess my biggest message is to just keep in touch with yourself throughout the process. That anything like an application to law school or the experience of law school involves a lot of the experience of other people evaluating you based on their criteria. And just try not to lose sight of your own criteria and your own sense of what's good and right and who you want to be. And to the extent that you want to pursue a legal career, holding on to that sense of your own compass just stays crucially important. So, do what you need to do to be successful in your chosen path, but keep a hold of who you are and what you want to be and why you're doing this in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. All some really fantastic advice. And I hope that if you're still listening to this point, that you take that advice and really reflect on your own values. And again, thank you so much, Professor Eisen, for sitting down with us and talking to the undergraduate students and the members of the UALC. And yeah, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting this podcast and for inviting me to take part.